Hello and welcome back to another video! This project is super exciting as it's something I've wanted to make since I was a kid. A traditional scale barn. So hopefully we can make something a little bit better than my Capri Sun stalls. The very first thing to do is draw a rough idea of what you want. This can be very basic just to get an idea. At first I was just going to do a stall in a small tack room, but I measured where I would be putting it and decided I could also fit in a grooming stall. I will be using mine for photography, so I have some variety for different shots. For example, you might want to add more stalls or a bigger tack room. As far as the style, I want to do an older barn. It will be fun to do all the textures, plus it's more what I'm used to seeing in real life. With this in mind, actual dimensions, and tons of references, I drew up a plan so I could figure out where to cut the wood for the main structure. Once I measured and marked everything where it needed to be cut, I had my uncle help because I cannot be trusted with saws. If you don't have access to saws, or an uncle, you can use thinner wood that can be cut with X-Actos, which I will also be doing later. For this big base piece, I did want something sturdy, so if you can't cut that, I would buy something close to the size you need and plan around that, or have a hardware store employee cut it for you. This was the only piece I ended up buying luckily, as my uncle and dad had lots of scraps laying around. These will make up the bottom layer of the walls. For the top of the walls and the inside, I will be using this leftover wall paneling. Before I assemble all the pieces, I want to add a brick texture to the walls. Using a tube of silicone, I cover the board. I spread it out with a craft stick and make sure it's mostly smooth, but not too smooth as imperfections will add realism. To add the pattern, I will be using a 3D printed roller. I enlarged one meant for D&D figures and printed it with a filament printer. I do use quite a few 3D printed elements in this project, so if you don't have one, make sure to check your local libraries and schools. Many have them available for the public for a small cost. I make sure to get it a little bit damp first so it won't stick, but not dripping wet as that can affect the silicone's drying. It's also worth mentioning I am wearing a respirator and gloves. Then I can repeat this on all the bottom wall pieces. Once they were fully dry, I can attach these two short pieces to make the back wall of the barn. I will be inserting wires, so I make holes about the same size. I place them in and mark where they stick out on the other half. I use that to drill the corresponding holes. Next, I secure those in place with my E6000 glue. I make sure to wear a respirator with this as well, and don't let it get on my skin. Then I can stick those together and let them dry. It's still not 100% sturdy, but once it's glued into the base and the upper wall is attached, it won't matter. With that dry, I can do the other side with the brick texture. For the barn floor, I will be using the same method, but instead of the brick, it will be cobblestone. You can see I've already done a section that is dried. I used clear silicone first because I had some left over. The rest I just did in white because it was cheaper. The clear is slightly squishier once dry, but it didn't really affect anything. Once that was all dry, I used a Krylon gray primer to do a base coat. After the primer dried, it's time to paint. The first thing to do is a dark gray wash over the whole thing. I got the paint very watery. I found that using a hairdryer not only helps this dry quicker, but also pops air bubbles. On a high setting, it even has the added benefit of pushing the dark color into all those nice crevices. Once that's fully dry, let's bring out some details with dry brushing. This really helps those details pop. I use a small amount of white on the tip of the brush and very lightly brush over and blend it in. With the base done, now we can do the brick walls. I spray painted white on any of the walls that had clear silicone bricks. Now of course an old barn isn't going to have bright white bricks like this, so let's age these a little bit. I'll be using a brown wash. Here you can really see what I mean about using the hairdryer to push it into the lines. I add more brown to the side that would be touching the ground. Next I add areas to simulate where the white paint has chipped off, leaving the natural brick exposed. Now I can start actually building the barn. I stained the inside of this wall to give it a darker color, and now I can attach it to our bricks with the E6000. These stained craft sticks will help give it a nice border, as well as aid in strength. I also add some decorative pieces. I glued the side panel on the same way, using some laundry I procrastinated putting away to hold it in place. I set some heavy things on to hold it down, and then I glued it to the base. This panel will be the tack room wall. You may have noticed it's reversed from my original sketch, and that's because I accidentally cut the top wall upside down when making the windows. But no worries, it will just be flipped so that the tack room is on the right side. Next I will be making the inside stall wall. For this I'm just using craft sticks that I cut the ends off of. To make sure this matches the rest of the barn, I stain it with the same wood stain as all the walls and other pieces. It's the same little can of dark walnut I've been using for a few things, but I definitely used it all up for this project. I glue that down in the same way as the rest. To make sure it doesn't fall over while drying, I use some temporary masking tape. I'll be using some square wooden dowels for structure and to make it look nicer. I cut the tops at an angle since that's how the roof will eventually sit. Lastly, I add on that final brick wall for the tack room. You'll notice it doesn't have the top of the wall yet. That's because I want to be able to open it. Since I'll be actually storing tack in it, I want to be able to get in and out pretty easily. To make hinges, I will first need to insert wires in the door, aka wall. I drill a hole and insert a wire that I bent into an L shape. For the piece that it will go into, I found this hollow aluminum rod that I cut down to size. I line them up with the wires and glue them to the back wall. For inside the stall, I want to have some nice comfy bedding for my horses, so I'll be using sawdust. I know there's absolutely got to be a better way to do this, but I just brushed glue down and sprinkled the sawdust on top. It's not the greatest method. I had to do 2 layers and I still ended up just putting some loose sawdust on top and coming to terms with it being a little bit messy. I've since seen other hobbyists that make terrain use the glue or Mod Podge mixture in a spray bottle, so that might be something to look into. For the stall bars, I designed these in Tinkercad based on the stall measurements. Then I 3D printed them with black PLA. Good old-fashioned wire or wood sticks would also work. I also attached this piece before installing the door. For the loft, I will be using the tried and true craft sticks. I'm making this much shorter than a real loft, since I want to be able to get the horses and things in and out easily. Plus, this will make it easier to see inside from a higher angle. Once that was stained, I can glue it into the barn. I set this scrap here temporarily to hold it up as it dries. I also add a dowel to the edge to give it a more finished look. I will be adding some lighting using these fairy light strands. I fold up a bunch so that the lights are on the end and hot glue them into place. Then I add on the 3D printed lampshade. Once they are secure, I twist the wire. These will go in the tack room. I do the same for the ones in the stalls, I just don't need to feed it through the panel first. I drill in the holes where they will go. There were some extra lights between the lamps, so I covered those with black nail polish. I also bent these, so they will be able to go off the loft while still facing down. The battery packs will feed into the top right side of the loft for easy access. I glue the wires up in the loft. I still make them a little bit visible for realism. Next I will be making these triangular pieces that will hold the roof up. Here's what I mentioned before about using an X-Acto knife. It's more tedious, but if you score both sides of something relatively thin like this wood panel board, you don't need to use a saw. Now I can glue them into place after staining the insides. I try and use this glue outside as much as possible when I can't open the windows. It's definitely not good to breathe in, and the smell lingers for a little while after. Now it's onto the roof. I found these scrap pieces of board and attached them together with craft sticks. For the shingles, I cut up a ton of the same sticks and placed them starting at the bottom. I do try and cut different widths for variety. Next, I take it outside to weather it. I'm using a brown acrylic paint thinned with a lot of water. Then I go ahead and just pour it down the sides to add a little rained-on effect. This will warp the wood a little, which typically you don't want, but in this case I wanted a little extra dimension. Once fully dry, I glue it to the barn. To get into the loft, I need a ladder, so I make one with dowel and cut up craft sticks. For the door, I made hinges the same way as the side panel, and now I can bend a wire for the latch. Once placed where I want, I glue the last piece that will hold it to the door. The inside roof looked a little bland, so I'll be adding some elements to simulate a building structure. I'm using some leftover pieces of blinds with a wood texture, as well as, you guessed it, craft sticks. I did forget the two middle dowels holding the roof up existed, and had to take apart and re-glue some of the pieces once they were inside. Now I can add some texture and grime to really sell that this is an old barn. I'm using a toothbrush to splatter white flecks over everything. I do more around the bottoms as if the dirt was kicked up. I'm also adding dark brown washed over various areas. This barn has definitely had a few leaks and windows left open. Now that I have a nice loft, it's time to put some hay up there. For the base, I made this template and used it to make sure they were all the same size. I lightly score where I will be bending the cardboard. I hot glue the edges together. For the ends, I just hot glue it onto the cardboard and cut it out once cooled. For the hay, I just took a bunch of lawn trimmings and dried them over a fire. You could also just leave them out in the sun for a while. But this method is more fun because you get to make s'mores. Now that I had my grilled grass, I can use this handheld food chopper to make the pieces a little bit smaller. I'm actually super allergic to dried grass, so I had to wear a respirator to do this. Luckily, my little bales don't affect me unless my face is really close. To add the grass, I cover a side with tacky glue and press it on. Once that dries, I can cut anything sticking off. I only do one side at a time, but I made a bunch of bales. I'm using some embroidery thread for the twine that holds the bale together in real life. Now I can place these up in the loft. I make sure they look how I want before gluing them in. The good thing about hot glue is you can always rip it up if you change your mind. Next, I'll be making a cabinet for the grooming stall. These are the same leftover blinds from before. I bend some wire for the handles, and then add 3 little pieces for hinges. want a swiveling hose boom for the grooming stall, so I also make that with wire. I use the same wire to make the saddle racks. I use my saddle to get the size right. I'm using super glue for this since it needs to dry faster. I had a rack outside the stall as well. Next I add screw eyes for the cross ties. Initially I used these leather strips, but I ended up swapping them out for chain since they wouldn't hang how I wanted, and the chain is easier for adjusting between different horses. I wanted a tack box for the front of the stall, so I made a pretty basic one with craft sticks and scraps. I used some more of this wood board for feed storage. I'm not great at making things with string, so when I got some Brussels sprouts and this little netting, I was like, thank goodness, I don't have to make a hay net. I used some leftover grass from my hay bales to fill it. I hang that up with a screw eye, but eventually I moved it to be a little bit lower. Here's a little rack that I made to hang halters and bridles. For the window glass, I will be using box plastic. I somehow don't think this will be too hard for you to find. Before I stick it in, I will be making little planters. I add some shutters to the outsides with the pieces I had cut out to make the windows. I'm using unfurled twine to make vines coming up the wall. I also add some bits of moss to the vine, as well as some to the top of the roof. To add some realism in the tack room, I found a bunch of charts and posters on Google and printed tiny versions. I put tape over some to appear laminated. For feed bags, I made these. I don't know if this feed is any good, but I found photos of the front and back, so that's what my horses will be eating. I also add tape to these so they are glossy. I'm making a little cork board that will go above the feed. For my mat in the grooming stall, I wanted it to have puddles, but getting a good gloss on fabric is hard. So I started with a glossy piece of vinyl and painted around where I wanted the puddles and hoof prints with clear mat. For open shelving in the tack room, I use more scrap wood board and drill holes to insert kebab skewers. As you can see, I attached my hose boom with the hollow rod. To make a hose, I used wire from a broken computer mouse. Next, I made a little broom with some twine and scrap wood. I add handles onto my 3D printed buckets with a thin wire. I glue some white flowers in for some decor. I add a little moss as well. Speaking of flowers, I add some little wisteria. These are left over from a different project, but I thought they would look cute here. I do have some props from Breyer, but to make some more I will be designing and 3D printing some. I'm using Tinkercad, which is super easy once you use it a few times and figure out what all the things do. It's also free, so I definitely recommend it. Here I am making a shampoo bottle. I will link the files in the description if you would like to use them. This will be a feed bucket for the stall. I make sure to look at real ones while I'm making it. A cool trick you can do is to use the SVG file of a 2D object and use it to make a 3D object. So I take this spray bottle lid, make it one color, and cut it out from the background in Photoshop. Then I can convert that into an SVG through either a site like this or a program like Illustrator. Then I can just put that into Tinkercad. Of course, it always says it's too big, so just adjust that. And ta-da! A head for my spray bottle. And here it is printed. I did use filament, which works, but it would be nicer printed with resin. Of course they need labels, so I found these. I also made little dewormer boxes while I was at it. I can't have my little horses getting little worms. I taped them on with regular clear tape, and now I can place them. I just use hot glue in case I want to move them around later. Here's how the feed bucket turned out. Another just fun little detail I wanted to add was moths flying around the lamps. I just cut them out of regular paper and glued them to a black wire. One of my favorite parts of old barns is the barn swallows. I had some nests with hot glue and grass. I paint over with the glue with brown to make it look like mud. I add black later as well. Here's a little electrical box I made out of cardboard. I rusted it with a reddish-brown acrylic. I also rusted a lot of metal in the barn. I 3D printed these fancy decorations to go on top of the windows. Of course I had to use my favorite model. Let me know if you can guess who. I also printed these tiny horseshoes. I was really putting the printer to the test. I also printed this fan. I made it in 3 parts so it would print easier. I did make a quick little barn swallow from some leftover epoxy. I will hopefully make him some friends in the future, but I could honestly go on forever making more little things for the barn, as well as refining things. And I probably will, but for the sake of getting this video posted and so I can have my living room back, for now we're all done. Time for the final result. This video was one of the hardest to make since it took so long and so much went into it, but it is absolutely worth it, and I'm glad I was finally able to make a barn. I hope you learned something from it and feel inspired to make a barn of your own or add to the one you already have. At the very least, I hope you don't judge my fashion choices or lack thereof too much. As always, thank you for watching. Don't forget to boop that like button and subscribe for more projects.